Hey there, Conversations is on the way, but I'm Erin Park, and boy, do I have a juicy yarn for you. My new podcast series, Expanse, Nowhere Man, is about how in 1999, a young American man with everything to live for walked out alone into one of the deadliest deserts in Australia, triggering a meteor storm and one of the biggest searches the country had ever seen. So why do some people feel the need to lose themselves in the wilderness in order to feel found? Listen and subscribe to Expanse on the ABC Listen app. You won't regret it.
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Mick Doleman has been married to his wife Joni for more than 50 years now, but there was a moment back in 1973, when they first got together, that Joni thought she'd lost him. Mick was the youngest member of the crew of a freighter ship called the Blythe Star that had disappeared from the face of the earth, somewhere off the south coast of Tasmania. More than a week had passed, and Joni had been advised that the crew had been given up for dead, and the authorities were calling off the search. But Mick and 6 other crew members were still alive. They'd survived the capsizing of their ship, and they'd been afloat for days on the cold and wild waters of the Southern Ocean. But due to institutional ineptitude and indifference, the search for them was badly mismanaged, and the men found it impossible to be rescued. The crew of the Blythe Star witnessed terrifying scenes as they banded together as best they could to survive this extraordinary ordeal. The story is told in a new book, put together by Mick and journalist Pia Wersu, based on the ABC podcast series. The book is called Back from the Dead. Hello and welcome, Mick.
Hello.
You grew up in Doveton, in outer Melbourne, near Dandenong, in a housing commission house in the 1960s. Your dad was a seafaring man before you. What kind of values did your dad instill in you as a young fella?
Yeah, well, he was a seafaring man. In fact, he was a Glaswegian who came to Australia via the Middle East. He was a policeman in Palestine under the British regime in those days, and he had a great sympathy for the common folk, and he instilled that in me in many respects, and my siblings. But he was a hard case guy, big drinker, and he died at a pretty young age, about 46.
You say you were drawn to the sea at a young age. What was the appeal of that for you?
It was a bit strange, actually, because we never had much in the way of wages and all that stuff. And he used to invite us down to the ship when he was in port in Yarraville. And I had to endure the haircut from the cook.
Was it a pudding bowl haircut?
Absolutely.
Would they actually put the bowl on your head?
He did, and he did. And I dreaded those days when he'd invite me down for a haircut. But one good thing came out of it, that he took me on a sea voyage from Melbourne to Portland as a ring bolt, which most people would call it a stowaway, but in maritime vernacular, it's a ring bolt. So I was in there, and I never had so much food in my life. The cooks were always prepared. I'd go up in the mess room. Nobody cared that I was there, and nearly ate the place empty. And then I got to Portland, and he sent me home via train or whatever the case was at the time. He hoped that experience would get rid of my interest in going away to sea. It didn't. It actually made me more and more intense on getting away to sea.
You thought this is the life, did you?
This is the life.
So at 16 you got trained at the Maritime Industry Deck Boy School in Newcastle. It's amazing to think there was such an institution, the Maritime Industry Deck Boy School.
Yeah.
And you got a slot on a tanker. This is your first ship that you got on.
Yeah.
What was it like for you to be shown to your berth on this ship?
Luxury, bloody luxury.
Bloody luxury, was it? Why was it luxury?
Well, at home, I shared a bedroom with three other brothers, and there was no privacy. There was nothing. And once I got out of Doveton and ended up in Newcastle at the Deck Boy School, a famous institution for deck boys. The one thing we learnt living in a pub on our own, the access to the bar on a Sunday was via the lift whale. and you go down the lift well, the little fellas would open it up, and then you'd help yourself to a few grogs and then back to work on Monday.
Life's just getting better and better, isn't it?
It is. My world opened up for me. And then I joined the ship, the Solon, which was a Shell tanker, one of the biggest on the coast at the time. And I got a train down to Geelong. The jolly boat came out to pick up. There was a few people to go out to the vessel. And out I went up the gangway. They took me into the mess room. My father used to work on this ship, the Solon, and went over to Singapore to pick it up as a new Australian ship. So when I'm board, they said, you better go and see the bosun. He's a boss, a foreman, so to speak. So I go in and I introduce myself, and he said, oh, I know your dad, Tommy, yeah. And now you're going away to sea. I said, yes. He said, well, come and I'll show you your cabin. So he took me downstairs, opened it up. It was the biggest cabin, or biggest room that I've ever seen for one person, and bathroom and shower all next door in the adjoining room, and a big porthole where you could look out to sea. I said, oh, this is fantastic. So he said, well, 5 o'clock up in the mess room and you'll get your dinner. So I did. I went up. And the bosun was there. He said, go in the pantry and the cooks will give you your tucker, whatever you want. There's menus up there. So I went in there. I said, oh, g'day, how are you? They said, who are you, son? Where are you from? I said, oh, my name's Mick Doleman. Oh, I know your dad, Tommy. Good bloke, good bloke. What do you want? I said, oh, I see there's a steak on the menu. Can I have a steak? I'd never eaten a steak in my life. And he said, of course, want it. How do I want it? On a plate would be, if you don't mind. They said, yeah. Do you want it up? Medium,
rare, well done,
well
right?
Done.
Yeah.
I said, I don't know. I've never had a steak, mate. He said, well, let's start with a Maria and then we'll work our way up. So I ate the steak and nearly all the bone. Then I went out to see him again. I said, I wouldn't be too greedy if I asked for another steak, would I? He said, no, of course, but go for well done on this occasion. Anyway, I had 3 steaks and I couldn't move. I was so bloated. So I went and thanked the cooks, and one of the blokes said, I'll give you one bit of advice, son. If you don't treat the cooks well, if you don't thank them for the food, you'll be eating Weet-Bix for a month. So I went out and thanked them, went down to my cabin and just collapsed on my bunk, and I thought, this is where I want to be for the rest of my life, at sea.
At the same time, you had your eye on a local girl named Joni.
Yep.
Family, you were a bit sceptical about you. They thought your family were a bit too rough as guts for them. So where did you take Joni on your first day?
We went to Pizza Hut. I had a bit of a debate with her. It was at the Pizza Hut.
Now, Pizza Hut in the 70s was a different institution. I have memories of this.
Yeah.
They had that ad, the pizza goes round and round while you're having a beer. Like it was a bit more, there was a tablecloth in those days and Dad could have a beer at the table. So that was at the upper end of fast food in those days.
No doubt. But it had another attraction, which I didn't emit at the time. Me and my mates knew that at Pizza Hut, the girls wore really short skirts and, all glammed up. And so when I invited Joni out to Pizza Hut, there was an ulterior motive as well, but not mentioned at the time. I don't think I've ever told her.
So you fell in love quite quickly, and you had all kinds of plans for her 17th birthday. You were, 17, 18? She was 17. What did you have in mind for her 17th birthday, Mick?
Yeah, well, I was on the roster, which was the employment area for seafarers, and there were a number of rules in that process. If you were on the roster and you were a particular category and that category was being sought, in my case, ordinary seaman, and there was nobody else that wanted the job, you've got to go. It's called Shanghai. And I had everything organised for her birthday, and I got shanghaied by the shipping master to join the ship.
So you went down to Hobart to join this vessel you'd been rostered on, the Blythe Star.
Yeah.
What kind of a ship was the Blythe Star?
It was a very small ship, only, really tiny ship in many respects, but it was, all intensive purposes, I'd been on smaller and I'd been on bigger. So it looked okay.
What was the task, the voyage you were supposed to be going on?
My task as an ordinary seaman was to steer the ship, navigate the ship as a seafarer, do maintenance on board the ship, lash cargo if it needs to be lashed, general maintenance and what have you, and monitoring and making sure that everything's okay. Not just me, we all did that. We all had those functions to do.
And what was the voyage that was being planned?
It was from Hobart around to King Island with beer, phosphate for the farmers up there.
So when you arrived at the wharf in Hobart, what scene greeted you there that night when you saw the Blythe Star for the first time?
The ship was in complete darkness. I got on board. There was no internal lights, there was no external lights, there was nothing. And I thought, what the hell's going on here? So I walked into the mess room, which is the tiniest little room where 10 men were supposed to eat and sit down and have coffees or whatever. And I said, where's the light? What's going on? One of the crew said, somebody took the shore connection and threw it over the side into the bay. There's a connector. It's like a PowerPoint connector. So the ship, nobody could go and start the generators, and we sat in darkness. There was nothing to eat, nothing cooked.
Was that bizarre? Did that strike you as bizarre?
Absolutely bizarre. I thought, this is a madhouse. Absolutely mad.
You were the youngest in a crew of 10.
Yep.
How did you get on with those men? What did you make of those men as you were introduced to them sitting around on board the ship?
Yeah, well, a couple I knew of, some of them sailing out of Melbourne as well as Tasmania. So the guys who I knew, Mick Power, who was a Newcastle lad, and his family were well known in that area. They're like an icon family. And Malcolm McCarroll, who was a mad punter and loved to have a bet and loved to gamble quite a bit. So he was well known, reasonably well known to me. But the others I had never met before in my life.
The next day you were watching as the cargo was being loaded onto the deck of the Blythe Star. Yeah. Phosphate, beer, as you say. What did you notice about the ship as the cargo was being loaded on?
Well, there was a considerable amount of cargo, it seemed to me. I made the comment to one of the wharfies. I said, where's the plimsoll line on this vessel? And the plimsoll line is a measurement gauge that is welded to the side of the ship, and it tells you can't have the ship in the water any deeper or higher than that.
Right, it mandates how high it should sit in the water.
Absolutely.
And where was the plimsoll line on this ship?
Well, the wharfies were saying it's on the funnels, which would mean that the ship is submerged to the length of the funnels.
Right.
But that was just a joke.
Right, because it was sitting very low in the water there.
Very low. And it was just a joke, but it ended up being more than a joke at the end of the day.
Did you say anything? I mean, was it for you to say anything as the 18-year-old youngest crew member?
I raised it with the bosun, Stan Leary, and he raised it with the company, and I think, well, I'm pretty sure that he was just dismissed.
So you were to take this cargo up to King Island in Bass Strait.
Yep.
So from one end of Tasmania to the other, if you like, and you can either go up the east coast of Tassie or the west coast. The east coast was going to be the longer way, but the conditions would be milder. The west coast would have been quicker, but more unpredictable, more treacherous conditions. Yeah. What did the captain decide?
Well, nobody knew. He made some comments to another captain on another ship, and he'd made some comments to the shore management that he'll make his mind up when he gets down a particular area. So that was the absolute confusion completely of which way he went, either east or west. And as it turned out, he went west.
So when you set out of the Derwent estuary, you're sitting too low in the water, you're taking the more treacherous west coast route. What about the captain himself, Captain Cruikshank? What did you notice about him, the state that he was in?
He was it was vague. He would go off and say something to you that was absolutely no relationship to what I'm doing. I'm steering the ship out of the port, and we start steaming out, and he says, head to that red house up the road there. Keep the compass on that. So then go starboard, go this. And then the relief helmsman, Mick Power, came up to relieve me. And I said, he's a bit weird, that skipper. He said, yeah, he wasn't very complimentary.
Had he been drinking? Was he drinking while you were at sea?
I never seen him drink at sea, no. But he would go down, leave the bridge and go down to his cabin, which is only very close to the wheelhouse, obviously, the back of it. And he'd be in there having a scotch. But again, I didn't see him. But the Court of Inquiry concentrated on that behaviour, and the judge was not convinced of his explanation that he'd gone to get a glass of water. It was laughable, quite frankly.
So the next morning you passed about Syker Island, and there was a lighthouse keeper called Tony Parsi, and he spotted your vessel, and he thought the ship wasn't travelling well. How was the ship behaving at this point?
It hadn't got into any really serious water because we were still sheltered by the land. But when we got to Syker Island, roughly around 8:30, the lighthouse keeper seen the vessel, and his commentary was that it was like a submarine. in operation. The bow and stern accommodation were covered in water. All the hatches were covered in water.
It's not a joke. It literally looked like a submarine in the water.
Absolutely. The bow would smash into the oncoming wave, and then the water would run all the way down the ship and then hit the accommodation and the wheelhouse area and then dissipate, and then that would happen again.
The ship was listing, it was tilting to one side. Yeah. Why was it listing?
Because the cargo had moved.
Shouldn't the cargo have been strapped down pretty tight?
Yes, it should have been. The hatch cover locking bars were not there. They were in the warehouse in Melbourne. These are bars that lock down to the hatch structure of the hatch covers. And they're designed, they've also got canvas cover that goes over the top of that. They're designed not to have the hatches being lifted up or breached by seas. Now, we had water, tons and tons of it, pouring down the deck every time the ship went nose down into the waves.
Now, you had done your stint at the wheel and you'd gone to bed.
Yep.
And then you were woken up.
Yeah.
When did you realise that you were in a major crisis all of a sudden?
I got pushed in my bunk up against the bulkhead, the wall, and the porthole was there, just in front of me to my right, and it was glass, thick glass, and I looked at it, and it was all water. There was no half water. There was no water splashing on and disappearing. It was water.
Underwater?
Underwater. My porthole and that port side of the ship was in the water.
So the ship's tilting now at an angle of what, like 40 degrees or something?
It would probably be about 45 degrees. So I got out of my bunk and the water was coming in my cabin. So I walked out to the alleyway and all the water was pouring down the alleyway. This is the alleyway to get out of the ship, and there were cabins on some side and no one was there. So I instinctively said to myself, I'm getting out of here. What I should have said to myself, go and get a life jacket, Mick, for Christ's sake. And I didn't. So I walked down the alleyway and I spotted Malcolm McCarroll in the laundry. Someone had left the porthole open and water was pouring in. And we both tried to push the porthole closed so we could put the latch on it. We couldn't. The amount of water that was coming through, was no way we could stop it. So Malcolm and I both took up the companionway onto the deck, and it was probably close to 90 degrees now. There was 2 or 3 other members of the crew on there as well. We had a life raft and 2 lifeboats. The lifeboats were useless to us.
Why were they useless to you?
One, because the lay of the ship, you would never get it off. Either one.
Right, it was too far gone on one
Too far gone. And otherwise, the tomahawks that were kept in the lifeboats were taken out by no other than the captain.
Right, the tomahawks you needed to cut the ropes to free them.
He took the tomahawks out of the boats.
Why?
Because he didn't want anybody to steal them. And he put them in the radio shack and didn't tell anybody where he put them.
So the lifeboats are useless, the ship is going down real fast, and you're 90 degrees in the water. By the way, you've been asleep in your bed. What are you dressed in at this point?
A pair of jocks.
What, that was it?
That was it.
What time of year is this?
October.
October in the Southern Ocean?
Yeah.
So that leaves you with the life raft, the inflatable life raft. Yeah. How did you get that up and running?
Well, it was in a box up on the deck, the poop deck, near where the lifeboats are, but useless. The bosun, Stan Leary, he started pulling it apart and he yelled down the deck, I need a pinch bar or something similar to get the lid off. And so somebody...
Well, you couldn't open it, in other words.
Couldn't. It was a bit difficult to open.
Right.
And I think Mick Power found a jerry bar or whatever, and he got the lid off the box and proceeded to get the life raft out of the box. Now, it's attached to a lanyard or a rope to the life raft, and the other end tied off to the rail of the ship because you don't want that connection when you're getting away from the ship. So
right, because otherwise the ship will just pull your life raft right down to the bottom.
Exactly right. So we've got to get that off, and Tassie Leary got that, and he started pulling, and inside the capsule that holds the life raft is a gas cylinder that once you get to the end of the tether of the rope, you give it a big pull. So Tassie pulled it and it inflated. And that got the line off the side of the ship. I jumped on into the raft. Other people were still coming through. There was a bit of a pregnant pause between the last one that got in, and we realised that there was a couple of people missing. Eagles, the chief engineer, to his credit, very brave credit, went down into the engine room to shut the engine down because the propeller of the ship was exactly where we had to launch the life raft.
Well, it could have shredded you.
It would have shredded us. There's no doubt about it. So he done that and then came and jumped in the raft, and everybody started putting pressure on me to get the line off, get the line off. And we looked around. I said, no, we're missing one bloke. The chief mate, he's not here. So everybody else was there. We had 9 on board and 1 missing. And the pressure was coming on me to cut that line and let's get out of the way. And I wouldn't do it. I kept trying to get the line off because I couldn't leave without knowing where the 10th man was, the chief mate. So he was in his cabin, and his cabin was locked in there by the weight of the water in the vessel. So he couldn't open the door to get out. He was in big strife. But what he did, he was smart enough to wait till the water equalised with the water inside the cabin and the water outside of the cabin. And he was able to open the door, pop up through the accommodation, and when his head surfaced, I started doing a little bit more effort to get that line off so we could all go and get away from the ship. So he come over, closer to where the life raft was. We all pulled him in, and then we got further and further away. We would be no more than 30 yards or metres. We were no further than that away from the ship when the ship just came out of the water. The stern disappeared under the water, and it was an amazing point of vision where the accommodation is disappeared under the water and the hatches and the bow and anchors were sticking up in the air. And the only thing I thought of is if that ship comes back down and lands on us, we are toast, absolutely gone. And as luck, and we didn't get much of it, it went straight down and disappeared. And there was not one thing on that surface of the ocean that would have indicated that the ship had just sunk somewhere in this vicinity.
Bloody hell, it's like a miniature version of the Titanic. So this thing went down at the blunt end rather than the pointy end of the ship. When that happens, when you're looking at this spectacle of this ship suddenly upright like a tower,
yep,
and then just goes, but is it loud or is it eerily quiet?
It's quiet, actually. I watch TV and all that stuff about the war and ships and whatever you know, I expected to see big heaps of bubbles coming out of it and jetsam floating on the surface, but there was nothing. Absolutely nothing.
So there you are. Well, I suppose there was a moment of elation that you'd all survived, the sinking of the ship.
Absolutely. In fact, I think a number of us described it as a bunch of school kids, you know, all excited about the fact we're alive.
What state was the captain in?
He was absolutely in shock. There's no doubt about that. He was no inspiration, unfortunately. Who's going to take the lead? Who's going to lead us to safety? I mean, these were my thoughts, and I know from the experience over the time, everybody had the same thought. Who's going to be our champion?
So it wasn't the captain?
No way.
Who was it that stepped up?
Ken Jones.
The last man to swim aboard?
Yes.
The guy who, just through sheer ingenuity, got his way out of the cabin, you were just saying before?
Yep.
That guy?
That's him.
The first mate?
Yep.
He suddenly filled that vacuum that the captain had vacated?
The captain did nothing, and Ken just rose to the occasion. You got an absolute swell of relief that this guy can lead us. This guy can look after us, can work it through. But he jumped straight onto the job. He said, we got to work on the basis that we're going to be in this raft for a while.
Why did you suddenly realise you were going to be in this raft for quite a while?
Because I said to the captain, he was cowered in the corner, if you can put a corner on a circular raft. He was just on his own with his head down. I said, did you get a Mayday off? He said, no. I said, did you get the emergency radio? No. It was too dangerous.
So what does that mean? What are the consequences of not sending off a Mayday signal and not having an emergency radio aboard this little inflatable life raft your 10 men are sitting in?
The hard cold fact is nobody knew where we were. Nobody knew that we'd sunk. So our expectations at first, before we knew that information, was 24 hours, they'll know that we haven't arrived, somebody will go looking for us.
Right, a ship and a plane and they'll find you.
Yeah, the cavalry would turn up.
So then you have to conclude that it's going to be a couple of days maybe before someone realises you're even missing.
That's exactly that. Ken says we should be right. They can't communicate with us because we haven't got a radio and we've got no communications with them. So we are going to have to put a watch-keeping system on board. That means every one of us have got to stand up and look through the canopy. And we know there are ships that are on schedules that come through these areas, and we've got to make sure that we're close by to send a flare-off to get their attention.
Right. So the situation's bad, but if we're rational and we work together, we'll be all right. This is what Ken Jones is telling you, the first mate.
Yes. And we all signed up for that. All of us, except for the skipper.
The second engineer, John Sloan.
Yeah.
He was in a bit of trouble. Why was he in a bit of trouble?
He had some medication that was in his cabin, and he didn't get his medication because he couldn't.
Is this for a thyroid condition?
Thyroid, yeah.
And what did that mean for him?
That meant that he needed to be rescued within 48 plus hours. Ken said, we'll get you off in time. We'll make sure. We'll do our best.
The next day, someone spotted Bruny Island. Now, you'd been heading west, but Bruny Island's just directly south of Hobart.
Yeah.
So the current must have, or the weather must have been pulling you back eastwards again then, I suppose. What happened when you tried paddling towards Bruny?
The currents just changed and the wind changed again. The raft has got sea anchors, which you could use to slow the drifting down. They're like a weathercock at the airports. And you've got a line on them and you throw that over the side and it will slow it down. But
drag in the water, right.
Yeah, drag in the water,
right.
Yeah. But no, you've got no propulsion except the paddles.
What kind of food did you have on board?
It was crap. Some powder, some biscuits, stuff that was out of date.
God, some old ship biscuits. How very 18th century that is. What about water, fresh water?
Water was in cans and you had to have a can opener to get to the water. And the can opener was public enemy number one, is that we didn't want that can opener floating around in the raft, a rubber raft.
You weren't puncturing it?
Yes. So the chief cook put in charge of the opener, and if worse comes to worse, we'll throw the bloody thing away. But the cans were handy to get fresh water when it rained, yeah.
Meanwhile, that part of the world, the Southern Ocean, just south of Tassie, there are all these rocky outcrops that just stick right out of the water like great big ugly jagged teeth or something. Were they a real danger to you?
Yeah, very much so. Pedro Blanco is a big island at the bottom of Tasmania, and a Japanese fishing boat some years before us crashed into it, and 23 of their crew were killed. And we paddled like Billy-O to get around that rock.
So by Monday, the ship's absence had been noted. There was a noticeable lack of activity, though. Then the media got the story of the missing ship, but still no proper air and sea search for this missing vessel. No awareness that it's even sunk. What do you know now about what was going on there? Why was the response so sluggish to the disappearance of the Blythe Star?
Well, there were so many people had the finger in the pie, but didn't know what to do once they got it in there. Maritime Safety Authority in Canberra had a view about how the search should be conducted. The Navy had a view about how they're going to get involved in it.
The Air Force too?
Air Force had a bit. They're good at doing all this, and we're not going to have anybody tell us how to do it in a different way. And, of course, the bureaucracy within Tasmanian Transport Commission was piss poor. And
was that just indifference or arse covering? What was it?
I think indifference initially, then plenty of arse covering later in the play.
It's just occurred to me that when the search began, they would have been looking for the ship, not the life raft.
Is exactly right.
So they're not looking for you really at all at this point?
No.
So then night fell. I can't imagine what it's like being in a little life raft with a canopy on it on the open Southern Ocean at night. What kind of darkness descends on you in that situation?
It's hard to describe. It is just black.
Could you see it? If you put your hand in front of your face, could you see it?
No. There was no full moons or anything like that. Occasionally you might get a bit of moon, but in the main, during the day you get a bit of light.
And then the weather started to deteriorate. And you write that at some point, waves reached 12 metres.
Yeah.
What, in the night? And you're in a tiny life raft? Is there any way you can describe what that experience is like, what you remember of being hoisted up and crashing down as you crest up and down these waves in the darkness?
When we got these storms from the Great Southern Ocean, you were in constant fear, because when the wave picked you up and took you right up to the top of the wave, it would then bring you back down and smash you into the trough of the wave. All of this is in complete darkness. You cannot see a thing. So you've got 10 blokes, you just headbutting each other, smashing into each other, because there's nothing inside the life raft that you can grab onto and give you something to stop you from being thrown around the whole raft. So this was constant. And in amongst all that, you've got a plastic bucket bailing water out of the raft, which is getting full every time. There's screams, and it was an absolute madhouse and so fearful. It was bloody awful.
And are you still just wearing your jocks? Are you still just in your jocks at this point? Have you found something to cover yourself with?
No, I was still in my jocks. One of the crew said to the captain, he had a jacket and it was pretty well spurred, said, "Why don't you give the bucko your jacket?" He just didn't answer. And so I didn't get it. And what, the biggest fear for us during those storms was the bottom of the raft falling off. People coming up and down, but that the arse of the raft falls to pieces and then everybody just gets spilt over into the ocean.
After day 4, you and the men start to lose sense of time.
Yeah.
And there's hunger and disorientation. Who's keeping you hopeful? Have you got hope still?
Diminishing, but Ken is a guy that's kept raising the importance of doing things in the raft, making sure that we're as seaworthy as we possibly can, making good use of what resources we have, which weren't many at all. The food, I could get by without the food. It didn't bother me. I think you can live a long time without food, but water was the most important thing, and we rationed that water to a teacup for one day on particular days. And when we had some good rain and we were able to capture some more water, we would utilise it very carefully.
And one night, in the night, you spotted the lights of a ship that turned out to be a Japanese fishing trawler in the water.
Well, I never got to see the lights, but Ken had his head through the canopy, standing up, and he saw a fleet. There was a mothership, and then there's a couple of smaller ships that feed into the mothership and probably get supplies for themselves, and then they go off and do fishing, and then they rendezvous somewhere else. All illegal.
Yeah, they're a long way from home, in the Southern Ocean.
The
other end of the planet, really.
Yeah, they were poaching fish out there.
So was Ken able to signal this ship and be seen?
Well, he said, "I don't want to send off a rocket flare just yet. I'm mindful that they might nick off if they see that there's activity out there, us." Anyway, so he kept just biding his time, and he said, I'm going to go now. He got the parachute flare. It was a dud. It didn't work. Then he got another one, and we only had a few. We didn't have enough to waste them. He got one up, and it was a big red glow across the horizon. You could not miss it. You could not miss it. You'd have to be somewhere the other side of Tasmania. And all their lights went out. All the deck lights were turned off. All the navigation lights were turned off. And it disappeared. The ship disappeared. They thought we were the authorities, and off they went.
On the morning of day 7, there was the first death. This was John, who had the thyroid condition.
Yeah. He was sleeping next to me in I've been talking to him for a considerable period of time over the days. He was next to me the whole time. And I slowly watched him pass away. We all knew that death was imminent, and I said to Ken, he's not breathing, he's not making any noise, not making anything. I'm not too sure how he's travelling. So Ken crawled over a few bodies and checked his pulse, and he said, he's dead.
How did that affect you?
Enormously. Enormously, because his death put us in the queue. It's inevitable. Nobody is looking for us. We assume that because it's been so many days. There's no relief coming. We're in a terrible state of affairs. But the universal view was, let's keep him on board for a bit longer so we can get him home to his family and he can have a decent funeral. And it got to the point where only about a day or two we come to the conclusion that nobody's looking for us. If they are, they're looking somewhere else. They're not looking here. And we got to bury him at sea, give him a seafarer's send-off. This is the spot when I get it a bit hard. And then when we all agree, and we had to have everybody agree, that that's the only course of action that we are able to deliver. And so we moved him closer to the entrance. The skipper said a few words, something like, we haven't known you for a long time, but we wish you all the best. And the hard bit for me was getting my hands under his arms as we slowly moved him over towards the raft, and we just slipped him over the side. I've been to funerals, we all do. But when you're going to do one like that, it knocks you around a bit.
So that is profoundly affecting emotionally.
Sure.
And what about philosophically for you?
At that time, I did give it thought of those arseholes who sent us to sea in a ship that had no security for the hatches, on a ship that had an incompetent idiot as a captain. And we weren't aware of the lack of communications between the departments and between authorities and what have you. And when he died, we thought, how much more have we got to take? And we didn't have a clue. But by Jesus, there was still a lot of game to play in this event.
You say that at some point someone saw some fins breaking the water. They were belonging to orcas, killer whales. Oh, God, that must have put the fear of God into you all.
Yes, it did.
Were they circling around you or what? How were they around you?
There didn't seem to be any uniformed engagement, but they were. I just picked it that they were a bit, sticky-nosed, just having a look, and so we just didn't do anything, didn't put any paddles in the water, just sat in the raft.
All right, so they weren't hungry like sharks, they were just curious like dolphins, in other words.
They were.
And were they checking you out? Could you see them checking you out?
I don't know if I could line up for that, but we knew of them being there, yeah.
Then at some point, you say that a kind of collective delirium took over the group because you've been in the water for days and days and days. It's freezing cold. Someone has died. You're all very, very hungry. Water is a bit hard to come by. You're losing hope. What form did that delirium take?
It's never left me that human beings could fall into a behaviour that is identical to each of them. I didn't know who instigated it. We broke open our cans of water. The cook opened them up and we were drinking them like it was beer, and that there was a crew off a Norwegian ship in company. And we remembered talking to them and having a laugh and a joke and whatever. Then I don't know what the time would have been, but we all sort of woke up pretty vague, empty cans of water rolling around in the raft. It was a mixture of absolute madness, disgust in ourselves, each person. What the bloody hell were we doing? And nobody could answer it. None of us could. And in fact, we best said, no, let's not say anything about it. Nobody will believe us.
the life raft was being pulled away, then towards the coast, pulled away, towards the coast, and you came up closer than ever, up to the Tasman Peninsula, and managed finally, after 9 days at sea, to get yourselves ashore into this rocky inlet called Deep Glen Bay, one of the most isolated parts of Tasmania.
Yeah. When we landed at Deep Glen Bay, we all started to migrate out of the raft and get onto the rocky beach, if you want to call it that. And we couldn't stand up, our legs were like rubber, so we had to crawl to get onto the land. We were just so pleased that we're out of the raft and not relying on our seafaring skills to get ourselves out. But we very quickly came to the conclusion that we're out of the fat and into the fire. I forget who said it, but the view from one of the crew was that we're never going to get out of here. We might have to get back in that raft.
What did you think about that?
I said, no way in the world, I'm not getting in that raft.
So what did you do about that?
I cut the raft. I cut one of the wings out of the raft to make a lap to keep myself warm.
So you're in this remote, wild inlet that's barricaded with rocky cliffs and dense forestry.
Yeah.
And then 2 more of your men died.
Yeah.
Part of this kind of collective delirium that was sort of going on, including Ken Jones, the guy who'd got you through all of that.
Yeah.
When I was reading this part, Mick, I was thinking, oh, I must have felt like you were living under some cruel star at some point. The fates have been so terribly cruel. It would have been so easy to give in and just lie down and wait to die like those 2 fellas did.
Yep.
What kept you going? What thought was it that kept you wanting to live and find a way out of this impossible place?
I think I have to put a bit of it down to my age.
What you didn't know well enough to give up, in other words, in a way.
I played football. I was a pretty tough guy. I just don't give in, and that doesn't mean that the others do, but it wouldn't take much for if you're so exhausted just to lay down thinking you're only going to have a snooze and it ends up you're dead. But I elected to go and find a way out on a couple of occasions, and the bosun gave me $10 to get some cigarettes if I found the joint. The only place I could put the $10 was down my jocks and the crutch. Well, actually, I came back. I failed. I didn't get anywhere near as far as I wanted to. And Tassie said, you still got that $10? I said, yeah, do you want it? He said, no, I'll have a new one when you get out. I had it there for about 3 or 4 days. And I completely forgot about the $10 note. And Tassie...
He wanted a fresh one. He wanted a fresh note.
Yeah, and I don't blame him.
After it effectively been used as a second underpants for yourself. Right. So after many failed attempts to get out of this inlet, you and 2 of the others did find your way, pushing your way through the dense forest scrub when you found your way up to a road. Long story short, a logger picked you up. The
luck of it all is that he lost his radiator cap on his truck, and he had to go back to look for the radiator cap. Anyway, he couldn't find it, so he was about an hour's behind where he would have been. We would have missed him. We would have passed each other in a different way, and so he come down, and I said to the boys, don't rush him, because they'll think we're convicts or that we're not honourable people. Let's just wait and hide until the truck gets up close.
Right, so you're standing there in your jocks and an orange canopy made out of...
Yeah, what can you worry about that?
What, like covered in cuts and bruises, looking like something from a horror movie, really, I suppose. And,
I'm sure he'd see that all the time in Tasmania somewhere. Just out for a stroll.
That's right. It's like everyday apparel in that part of Tassie. It is, yeah. He stopped for you, though.
He stopped, and I said, you're not going to believe this, but we're off the Blythe Star with the crew of what's left of the Blythe Star. He said, nah, yeah, they're all dead. They cancelled the search days ago. I said, they what? And I was absolutely livid. If I could have got a hold of anybody that had anything to do with this, I would have nailed them. I'm not kidding you. We were just disposable seafarers, cancelled it. I mean, you got to imagine what the families and all that had. And
your family. Everyone had been told you were dead, including Joni, your fiancée.
It was disgusting the way they behaved. Absolutely disgusting.
Then I suppose once you were able to get to a phone, how were you able to tell Joni you were still alive?
Well, we went to Denali, to the cop station, and it's a country cop. There's no one there. So we went to the post office, and the postmistress's husband, a retired fisherman. So we go there and tell them what's going on, and the next thing you know, they've got scones out and wanting to look after you. And
Scones?
yeah, scones.
You know, that's lovely, but for a man who's starving to death, there's not a vast amount of nutritional value in a scone. It wasn't like it didn't give any space bars or energy drinks or anything like that, right?
No, well, the truck driver did. He had a packet of Minties in his truck, and we ate
there you go.
Yeah, we didn't even take the wrapper off, I think. And, of course, when we went into the post office, they were all horrified about the whole thing and glad that we were there, and she arranged us to send telegrams off to everybody. And I sent her a telegram. Don't remember they had those things then. And she got the telegram, and the young guy down the post office took it up to her where she was working in the chemist. And the message was, don't worry, I'm safe, I'm in hospital, and I'll be home soon. And she said, what a rude bloody joke. What a rude bloody joke.
Oh, she thought it was a prank?
She thought it was a prank. The family come in, and who would be the prick that would do that? Anyway, I think I got a phone somewhere to ring and to let them know that it's true, I'm there. And, of course, all of the families that were still alive had beautiful stories to tell about finding out the information. But I also reflected on the guys who were dead, and no good news for their families. And that made me really angry, because this tragedy was coming to an end, and some will be able to celebrate, but others will be heartbroken for a long, long time. And those who are the cause of this tragedy should have paid a lot more.
There was a Marine Court of Inquiry eventually into the sinking. The Tasmanian Transport Commission that owned the ship was found to have performed with gross incompetence and callousness. The ship was found to have not been seaworthy. The emergency provisions were inadequate in the extreme. The captain was incompetent and unable to properly operate a radio. The search was ridiculous. There was vast amounts of arse covering afterwards from the authorities. And then the barristers, some of the barristers in this case, as they questioned you and others, tried to hang responsibility on the dead men.
Yeah.
Was there any good that could come out of such a debacle?
I expected them and demanded apology to all the crew and their families. There should have been an apology at the highest level for those seafarers and those searchers, and it hasn't come, and I'm still arguing about it, and will continue to push this. The 50th anniversary has just gone past, and there was an event down in Hobart where the governor came along and others, but still no apology. And some of those families lost their whole livelihood, and I think if there's a decent government that has some compassion for the occupation of seafaring, allows these things to happen, and in sync with the no-hopers who done nothing to help these people, it's an absolute disgrace.
You became very active in the union movement, the Maritime Union, after that, and became a senior official after a while. Did anything come out of that inquiry and through your activities? How much safer is it now for seafarers? How much safer did it become for seafarers after this terrible debacle?
That's true. There were some significant changes. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority, the relevant authority for seafaring, along with a number of institutions and employers and unions, worked together both at the domestic level but also in the national level, in the international level. My National Secretary of the Maritime Union, Paddy Crumlin, is chair of the ITF, International Transport Workers Federation, where that body has something like 150 inspectors and organisers in the global shipping industry, making sure that those ships have all the right equipment, making sure that their crew have all the right skills and tools to do the job properly. They are working also to stop the shonky ship owners who use cheap labour out of the Philippines or Indonesia or wherever and treat them like shit, owe them millions of dollars in lost salaries The union and the International Transport Workers Federation are doing that, so we don't have the Blythe Stars all over the globe doing these type of things. And of particular importance is the ship reporting mechanism. See, nobody knew which way that ship was going. It was east or west. Nobody knew, so that meant the search was going to be enormously big. Nowadays, your ship has to demonstrate to the authority that they are sailing at this date and they're going which direction, and every 24 hours they have to go back to AMSA, the regulator, and say, we're at that spot, we're going further on. When they get to their destination, they can sign off and say, we've landed.
Does so much of this come out of this ancient tradition is what happens at sea stays at sea? You're off the mainland, you're in this kind of Wild West land now where there isn't really any kind of government or any kind of authority or any supervisory authority. Is that part of the very ancient culture of seagoing that goes back to the year dot, I wonder?
In some countries in this world, yes, they're called FOCs, flag of convenience, where countries will register their ship in some far-flung country and then they will operate under that regime, which is absolute crap. Captains think that they can do whatever they want. And there are seafarers, poor seafarers out of third world countries that have been killed over years. The seafarers have been treated absolutely horrible over those years, and the ITF and the maritime unions around the world are working with the ITF to chase these buggers out of the industry.
I know you're still haunted about the thought of those 3 men that died, but one of the things that kept you going was the thought of the lovely life you might have ahead of you with Joni, and that's pretty much what happened, isn't it, Mick?
Exactly. I was blessed to meet and to win the affections of my wife. We've now been 50 years plus married, and I remember with great humour when we're at the wedding at the Catholic Church in Dufton, and I could hear as we're walking to the altar, it won't last. It won't last. 2 years, a year, it won't last. But it's been a marriage in heaven.
What an extraordinary story, and it's been such an amazing experience hearing you tell it, Mick. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mick Doleman is the co-writer of the book Back from the Dead with Pia Wersu.
This is Conversations with Richard Fidler.
Today's conversation was created on the lands of the Gadigal people. Producer was Nicola Harrison, and she's the executive producer as well. I'm Richard Fidler. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.